Hello, I'm Andrew Hall, and this is Dead Hand Radio. My guest for this episode is author, comedian, and lead science writer for the Debrief, Chris Plain. Chris and I met on Twitter and quickly found out that we shared a few common interests, including UFOs and science. And as soon as I started reading his work for the Debrief, I became an instant fan. Not long after that, I invited him on the show to talk about these things, and here we are. Welcome to Dead Hand Radio, Chris.
Thank you, Andrew. It's awesome to be on finally, man. We've been talking about it for a couple months, so
yeah, it is good to finally
together. So.
Yeah, it's good to finally bring it together. So,
thank you.
So the topic for tonight, the title and the topic tonight is UFOs, science, and the Cold War. And
Sure.
But before we get into that, tell me a little bit about you growing up as a child of the Cold War. I'm sure that you became aware of it at a relatively young age, as most people do.
Yeah, my first memory is probably, in regards to that, would probably be maybe 76. So when I was about 7 years old, and I remember hearing on, it was probably a fiction show. It was probably something I watched about a bomb that could blow up the whole world. And I remember I went to my grandmother, who was the one, my dad's mother, who's the one that would give me the straight info on stuff. And I said, Grandma, is there a bomb that'll blow up the whole world? And she kind of, in short, as much as you could for an 8-year-old kid, explained to me the atomic bomb and what the Cold War was. And, that no, there wasn't one bomb that someone could push the button and the whole world would blow up. But if the Soviet Union and the U.S. went to war, there would be, it's very possible the entire world could get blown up. So that was kind of my first, oh crap, we're in the middle of something here. I think the way kids nowadays grow up with the environment, right? I think they grow up with this, as soon as they're tuned into it, they go, I'm kind of living in possibly a ticking time bomb, that needs to be addressed. So I think that was the way it first hit me.
I think that's true. I think every kid goes through a period in their early childhood where they realize that the world is not quite as safe as they may have thought. I think the times that we live in now, although the last year and a half have been pretty volatile because of the COVID pandemic, but which I just got my channel banned. Sorry, YouTube.
Yeah, right.
I heard you're not supposed to say that word on YouTube.
Oh, really?
I always joke about it when that word comes up. Through the 70s and the 80s, we were in the midst of potentially nuclear war, the end of the world, that kind of thing. I remember growing up with it quite in the forefront of my mind.
Yeah.
All the science fiction movies that were out that were talking about it, even several sort of what would you call those? They're not really documentaries, but they're fake kind of documentaries,
like docudramas or
docudrama,
reenactments.
Those things talked about the Cold War. What was that one? The Day After. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, that was a big network TV event. I think maybe 1980 or so.
Yeah.
And it was the first time they had really done a what if nuclear war broke out sort of movie. And I remember it was intense. I remember watching it with my family and having that visceral feeling of the bombs are blowing up around you. And I know you mentioned you're in Nevada. I grew up in San Diego, real close to the Marine MCRD down there, Naval, the 32nd Street Naval Station and Camp Pendleton. So 3 of the biggest, military establishments. So there was this realization that, I might be living in a target zone.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty, as a kid, you're trying to think about baseball and comic books and cartoons on TV. And
Super Friends.
You just have this thought in the back of your head that every once in a while you see something on the news or on TV or a magazine cover, which is how I got introduced to it. But
Andrew, there was also this sense. I think that's, when you lived through it, you didn't know, like the Soviet Union, like there was a feeling like maybe we aren't going to outrun this Cold War, and what happened to them could have happened to us. There was this feeling maybe we will collapse economically. Now, as I got older and I got into politics in the 80s and did some debates and got some opportunities to go to Washington, D.C. and meet politicians and stuff, there was already a feeling behind the scenes in the mid 80s that the Soviet Union was running out of money and they were having a hard time keeping up. Star Wars, not the movie, but the Strategic Defense Initiative.
Yeah.
Those sort of things just ramped it up. So yeah, but as a kid growing up, there was definitely a feeling of like this war could break out at any time, or we could wake up any day finding out that like we lost, like we gave up. There was really a palpable sense of like this could happen at any time. Yeah, for sure.
Jack Ryan and Rodrigo Vieira are with us in the chat. Thank you guys for being here. Jack says, I know for a fact Christopher Plain takes his bagels with cream cheese.
He does know that for a fact. I'm not going to tell you how. Jack is not incorrect on that. So.
That's cool. Jack's a good guy. And Rodrigo, too. Thank you guys for being here. Appreciate it. Awesome. I always say this, and, I don't know if people get tired of me saying it, but I believe that as much turmoil as we had during the Cold War, that whole 4.5 decade period, it was the most innovative period in human history to that date. There was more technological advancements, more advancements in science, medicine, and and militarily, we were building bigger, better ways to kill people, but we were also advancing the quality of life for most humans on the planet as well.
We were seeing the beginning of the century and millennium we live in now. We were seeing microprocessors integrated into everything. We were seeing computer chips put on cars starting really in the 70s. I mean, it wasn't ultra sophisticated computer chips we think of today, but by the 70s and 80s, your car had a computer in it. Your coffee makers and microwave ovens, a lot of that was like just starting to like creep in. But yeah, I completely agree. Like the world that our parents grew up in and the world that we grew up in, completely dramatically different in the second half of the 20th century. A huge leap forward in like myriad areas. I mean, think about it. Think about the end of World War II. Like nobody had been to space yet. We hadn't even, the Sputnik was like in the 50s. Yuri Gagarin was in the like 1960 or 61, the first human in space. So man, no doubt, like a huge, those 4 decades. And there's, a lot of people will theorize that competition will bring out the best, and maybe on some levels that active competition between the East and the West brought out the best.
Well, it's the theory of evolution, man. The survival of the fittest.
No doubt about it.
And that struggle for life over against all odds.
And evolution is a real thing. I don't want to get into a science and philosophical discussion about the origin of life, but I can tell you that once you go to about 300,000 years after the planet was formed, 300 million years after the planet was formed, and you start getting into the dawn of life on planet Earth, that first to now, it's a pretty readable roadmap. I mean, genetic science, a lot of things. So there's no doubt that we can look at evolution in work now. Look at the Delta variant, right? That's evolution. That's active evolution. That's the weaker variants are dying and the stronger variants are moving on and replicating. And didn't mean to get off on a tangent, but whenever I hear evolution, I have friends that I consider to be pretty bright people that want to argue with me sometimes, and I like to tell them, I'm not saying I have an understanding of where life come from. That's an origin of life question. But as far as the process of evolution, it's just a simple biological process that just happens. It's just from flora to fauna to eukaryotes to microorganisms, you name it. It's just something that happens.
Sometimes it could be forced. Other times, it's a natural process. I mean, it is a natural part of life. And yeah, I totally agree with that. And you're welcome. The two things that I really don't like to talk about is politics and religion.
Yeah, amen to that.
It's kind of hard to navigate through those when you're talking about the Cold War or even global, global affairs, which I do talk about sometimes.
But yeah, when it comes to America and science and our progress, I think that's as exciting a period of time as we've had, and I think we're seeing the fruits of a lot of that. So.
Yeah, for sure. Rodrigo says, I remember comics had a great influence in my fear of nuclear weapons as a European. And yeah, I mean, the comic books that are coming out now still talk about nuclear war and the threat of nuclear war. It's evolved. This threat of nuclear war has evolved to a different. We're in a different period, but there's still.
We're not in a less perilous time, Andrew. Let's be completely honest. When we were talking about the U.S. and the Soviet Union staring each other down across Cuba or across the Atlantic Ocean, we're in a much nuclear weapons are much more proliferated now. Iran has nuclear weapons, probably. Israel, we know, has them. North Korea is working their way there. If they don't already, I think they've done a couple of tests already. I mean, we're in a lot safer place, a less safe place. Let's be honest.
No, there's a lot of hot spots that could easily just, the flick of a match could light off World War III, and we'd be in the middle of it.
I've had ex-military tell me, privately that, there's ex-Soviet Union nuclear missiles that probably aren't where they should be. I'm going to leave it at that, so I don't go away in handcuffs. But there's probably missiles that are missing. There are probably some broken arrows out there.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, you could just think about it, but don't think about it too hard, because you could scare yourself into hiding out in a bunker the rest of your life.
Take solace in the fact that we're all going to die, Andrew. It doesn't
matter. Yeah, you have to, man. You have to realize that we have a limited time on this planet. Right. Enjoy every moment and make the most out of it.
Try and persevere. Try and live to 200 years old and have a great time, and live with that existential ennui that you don't have to live forever. The permanent record runs out the day you run out, so don't worry about it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Rodrigo jumping in again.
India and Pakistan do definitely have them, and they're pointed at each other.
Yep.
And they don't like each other for the most part. Woo. They, in fact, have skirmishes across the border occasionally. The thing that scares me the most about India and Pakistan is an accidental or a misidentified launch.
Yep.
And then they go at it full steam ahead, and
they're slam right up against each other. We're not talking about shooting missiles over the Atlantic Ocean.
Right.
We're talking about two countries fighting over a little strip of land called Kashmir, smacked right up against each other. Exactly. So yeah, there's not enough time to call anything back, right? Something goes wrong over there. Kaboom, nope. That's it. Yeah, that's a very scary situation.
They're minutes away. I mean, even the U.S. and the Soviet Union, when they were, at odds, they were minutes away, but at least they were like 20, 30 minutes lead time. That I think with hypersonic weapons, that's kind of been whittled down to maybe a couple of minutes.
There's a lot of questions about hypersonic weapons. I know the military just abandoned rail guns, and they've been working on those for a while. And I know part of what we hear is that it's in favor of hypersonics because those are making more sense. We'll see. I know we're in the middle of a disclosure right now, so maybe we'll learn about something else. But hypersonics are definitely China, Russia, and the U.S. are dumping a lot of money into it. That's for sure.
Sure. We'll get into that a little bit more when we start talking about the debrief and how
awesome
what you're doing over there. Because
the who?
The debrief.
The debrief?
Yes, the debrief.
I had to give Mike Mataluni a hard time the other day over the pronunciation.
That was so funny.
Debrief. So I just call it the debrief.
The debrief. But it's an E, man. It's not an A. The debrief, that's an A.
Yeah, so, it's like when people say, "How are you? Are you happy?" And you say, "No, I'm depressed." No,
right, exactly.
I'm depressed. Come on, let's be honest, Andrew.
So let's talk about your writing, man. We'll get into that other stuff, and
Absolutely.
we'll lighten up the mood a little bit. You're a fantasy author,
Yep.
written several novels. You've written and also performed comedy, and you write for the Debrief.
Correct.
Uh,
Right.
how did you? What was your biggest inspiration for getting into writing?
So in stand up, I started as a performer, and I was in a group on campus at UCLA called the UCLA Comedy Club, and it was what it sounds like. It was a club of students trying to become comedians. And a few of the guys and women I was working with at the time as students have gone on to work in entertainment. I think the only one that really became established as a stand up comedian was Chris Hardwick. But, a few other guys on there have gone on to produce and write on TV shows and all of that. And in that environment, it's a collaborative writer's room where you learn how to work on each other's materials. So we would show up to meetings, pitch, hey, I've got 3 jokes about this or 2 jokes about that. And you have a room with 15, 20 other comedians to help you build that up and hash that out. And a friend of mine who's a writer and who's been on writing staff over at the Family Guy for 20 years, he was the president when I joined, and he told me, he goes, of all the things I learned in college, the UCLA Comedy Club Writers Room is the one most similar to what I do professionally now. And one of the other guys, Pat, writes over there too, and he told me the same thing, that it's a lot like that Comedy Club Writers Room. So that was kind of the start of like writing for other people. In the stand-up world, a lot of people go into sketch comedy, which is like Saturday Night Live sketch type stuff. And I was living in LA at the time. I'm still real close. I'm down here in Long Beach, so I'm still close. And I had a number of those friends that were in stand-up going into sketch, and they said, hey, you're a good writer. And I would start writing sketches for them. And then one thing led to another, and a couple of them were on a big radio show in LA, the Fraser Smith Show. So I did writing over there. And then people would come to you about, hey, write a pilot for my TV, or write an episode for my TV show, or help me with my screenplay. And just kind of evolved into something I did collateral to stand up for a long time. And then it just kind of became the exclusive thing. I may be returning to the stage. It's been quite a while. I actually found myself at the Comedy Store in Hollywood last night to see a show and to run into some old friends. And I've been encouraged to return to the stage. So that's probably happening soon. But yes, writing started just stand-up writer, sketch writer, screenplay, TV writer. And then as far as the books and writing at the Debrief, the book started in 2010. Like everyone else, I just got tired of waiting for the next Game of Thrones novel. And it still hasn't come since that last one in 2011, I guess, came out. And so I started working on my own epic fantasy series, something I had in my head for years and years, characters, stories. When you talk to a lot of writers, I'm sure a lot of creative people in any endeavor, even cooks, they'll have recipes they're working on for months and years in their head. It finally crystallizes. And they go, all right, this is coming together. So I spent 5 years working on that first novel called Whispers of Fate. It came out in 2015. The sequel, it's a 7-book series I'm working on. The sequel came out in 2016. That book is called Of Bonds and Betrayals. And then the 3rd book came out in 2018, Echoes of Destiny. And the 4th book has been quite delayed because of Debrief and other writing projects. I had a screenplay in there someone needed help with. So that one comes out late next year, late 2022. So book 4.
Right.
And I have a couple other novels I'm working on too.
So the trilogy is supposed to be a 7-book series.
Yeah, so the first 3 books are out, and they do live on their own. Like, you could definitely read all 3. They conclude, I believe, in a satisfying way. My editor, my beta readers, the people that read it back when I was working on it all kind of told me, yes, this concludes in a satisfying way. And then book 4 through 7 pick up about 17 years later with some of the same characters, a lot of the key elements, and a larger, broader story that incorporates those first 3 books. But yeah, if you wanted to go to plainfiction.com and buy book 1 for Andrew's show tonight, I made book 1 99 cents.
Oh,
So
nice.
you go on Amazon today or tomorrow for the rest of the weekend. It'll probably turn off sometime Monday. And yeah, the first book is 99 cents. It's a 300 plus ebook, a 300 plus page ebook. It's definitely and really, I think it's all 5-star ratings on it. So it was a fun process, and I learned a lot about complex writing, even more so than a screenplay or a TV script. Writing a full-length novel and then trying to work in mind with a novel that connects to 6 more books.
Yeah.
You got to keep track a lot. You don't want to end up with a, Darth Vader betrayed and murdered your father, and then 2 movies later you're trying to give the certain point of view excuse. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. So you have to do a lot of world building before you even write the first book, more or less. Is that right?
I think that's what we see too, like in epic fantasy. When Lord of the Rings came out, when he wrote that, Tolkien, he had written a whole bunch of short stories and things. They kind of all got assembled into a bigger volume called the Silmarillion. Same thing with J.K. Rowling, like those Grindelwald books and movies are coming out now. That's all her prequels. She had at least all that arced out. And I kind of took the opposite approach. I said, when I read fantasy or action adventure or science fiction, I just want to keep going forward. I grew up with the 3 Star Wars movies, right? Yeah. The first 3 movies as a kid. You and I are close to the same age. Grew up with those 3 movies, waited forever, and then they went to prequels. And I went, but I want to go forward. I think that's it. And so I think you can end up in a Game of Thrones situation where you've told your whole story, and then they go, all right, let's do some prequel series. I like that. But with Star Wars, I felt like the story wasn't done. And I didn't want to do that to my readers. So my fantasy series takes place, is 1 through 7, and there is no prequel. You're living in the prequels in the first 3 books, essentially.
That's cool. Yeah, that is a good flow. So real quick, Jack Ryan says, ask Chris who he thinks will end up on the Iron Throne, and that must be a reference to Game of Thrones. I haven't seen any of the episodes.
Here's the reasons why I love and hate George R.R. Martin. So I love George R.R. Martin because he's written as good an epic fantasy series as ever been written. I mean, for me, the 2 I mentioned, J.R. Tolkien and J.K. Rowling, are the standard bearers. I think Thrones is right there. But here's the problem. When you write fantasy like I do now, at least for me, I have a real fear of being influenced by somebody else's work. So because of that, I've never watched a single episode of Game of Thrones TV show. I have never, and I have them all. I want to watch it. Don't get me wrong. I would love for him to finish the books, let me read that final book, and then go ahead and do it. But in the middle of my own series here, I've got about 4 more years of writing on my own series, and I just don't want anything to overlap, even on an unconscious level. There are times I'm reading my own books and I go, oh, that kind of feels like it's out of Frank Herbert's Dune, or that moment kind of feels like it's out of, Arthur C. Clarke's, or feels like it's out of iRobot, or, it's a huge concern when you're trying to tell a big epic story. So I'll say Sansa, but I don't know anything.
I don't even know what that means, man. You guys are talking in code or
something. She read the first books and she was at the Red Wedding. I assume she's still alive, but I have no idea.
Yeah. So Jack says, here's a good question. How does Chris approach world building? And that is a good question. I like to hear others talk about their
So that's, to be honest, wow, what a great question. That was the background, right? Like that was what was kicking around in my head forever. I had this magic, in fantasy, you should have something supernatural or magical, whether it's a creature or a type of magic or something. And I had a magic where the idea that it was almost like a religion, and it is a religion. And the people in the religion in my world all wear various types of jewelry made out of specific ore that's been mined out of the ground. And those ores, those jewelries are passed down from generation to generation. And your entire lifetime of rituals and prayers and all those things that you do infuse that ore with part of your spirit, part of your soul, and part of your own passion and belief and all that. And the idea is that, at least in theory, somewhere along the way, that power becomes mature in the ore and presents itself to the wearer. And it might be 20 generations from the first person who wore it in that same family line. And all of a sudden you have power. And
that's a really interesting way to do it. Yeah, that's an interesting way to approach magic.
Yeah, because I mean, I grew up, I was raised Catholic. I don't practice religion anymore, but I was raised Catholic. And I really like that idea. And that's why I even mentioned Frank Herbert's Dune. You know, he uses a lot of, there's basically nuns and priests and a lot of that same structure, even though they're under different names. So I just like that idea.
If I can interject a little bit, it reminds me of a technology that's been in development for decades or even possibly centuries, that it's not even usable until it reaches a certain level of maturity, like a certain level of development.
Absolutely. Technology. I think that's a good comparison.
Yeah, yeah. So that's why I really dig the way you approach that. That's interesting.
So I had that in my head for a long time, like for years. Like I knew one day, I said, if I ever write a fantasy novel, this is my MacGuffin, they call it in screenplay writing. This is my hook, this is my magic. And then I started to have a character coming into mind. And my lead character is a young woman named Alira, which happens to be my niece's name. And it's an Irish name. And I just, over time, things came together. I had a very clear idea of my villain, the shepherd. I had a very clear idea of the world. And these things just, and one day I sat down and I drew out a whole map. You can actually download it on my website for free. And it's high def, so you can zoom right into little components of the cities and read names and street names and all kinds of stuff in there. And even my wife says, you're not an artist, but it came out pretty good, right? And I was building this map forever, lists of characters, all that background stuff you talked about, world building, as it were. And I had to build the politics. I based a huge amount on politics and technology on ancient Greece. So it was something I was really fascinated on in school. I like this idea of kind of a democracy, I have like a Senate and a prime senator. I kind of like that in motion, but the technology in the military, like there's no gunpowder, right? We're in a full fantasy world. I will tell you, I don't use the word dragons, the word swords, the word, like maybe a lot of typical fantasy components don't show up there, but I think anyone who reads it will feel like they're in a fantasy novel. No doubt about it.
Do you have monsters and mythological character? Or
I do have, here's the rules I set out for myself. As I said, I don't want any animals that talk, and I don't have a problem with that. I love Disney movies. I love that feeling. I just didn't want that in there.
Not Christopher Plain. It's plain fiction.
Yeah, not Christopher Plain. I don't know who that is. There's another screenwriter out there with that name somewhere, so I don't want to overlap on his work.
Sorry about that, Chris. Go ahead. Continue.
No. What was I saying?
You were just talking about the mythological characters.
Yeah,
your version of those.
It is a fantasy novel. There are supernatural elements. There are characters that it may take you a couple novels to figure out, oh, there's more to this person than I thought. At the same point, I have a complaint. Fantasy is a lot like a superhero movie, right? You have regular people and you have people with powers, right? Yeah. Or at least have access, or monsters or creatures that have access to these powers. Nothing ruins a superhero TV show or movie like over time, everybody you thought was normal has powers.
Right.
And everybody's got superpowers.
Yeah.
So that doesn't happen here. Pretty much everyone in my books are regular people, but magical things are going on. There are magical characters. In the opening of the first book, that idea, these heirloom ores, they're heirlooms that are passed down made of this ore. Nobody currently has one that is living, is the term I used, a living ore. So nobody's currently got these powers. And it's been long enough in history that everybody alive is like, maybe it's all BS. Maybe it's part of this religion to keep us going to church and
it's a little bit of conspiracy theory.
But yeah, maybe nobody ever really gets these powers. Maybe it doesn't ever present itself to anyone, and it's all just a control mechanism. So that's the world my character, in the opening novel, she turns 18 right at the day 3. My first book just takes place over 3 days. It's just an insane, just start to finish, light the torch, and action happens, and we go right into a big conclusion. That's the last entire. It's just, you can read it in 10 minutes. Just rips right by.
The chat has quite a few questions. So Rodrigo says, "How worried are you about the science in your writing?" And he's writing a science fiction novel at the moment, and yep. He says, "I think I'll be in that part of the process for some time." Because of the science.
This is huge for me. This is something I'll admit I'm pretty passionate about. I do have a science fiction novel coming out. It was originally due later this year. Because of the debrief and things that are happening there that are all good things and exciting things, that release date has been pushed back to probably February or March of next year. But there's actually an organization called the Science and Technology Exchange. And it was like board members include Seth MacFarlane and Neil deGrasse Tyson and people of this nature. And I know Neil's controversial in the UFO community, but basically the idea was nothing's more frustrating as somebody who's a little bit educated to watch a science fiction show or movie or read a science fiction book and have the science kind of presented just as magical, that it's not really grounded in anything. And the closer you get to real science, the more enjoyable it is, I think, at least for guys like me, too. So I would recommend that, was it Rodrigo who was asking the question? I would definitely recommend he go to the Science and Technology Exchange, send them an email, and what they will do is the components in your story that are science-based. So, for instance, in my novel, Titan, I have some advanced propulsion, not exotic, not faster than light travel, just kind of zooming around the solar system. I have some science around aging and telomeres and biology and biological science. And I have some, what do they call it? A space elevator. If you're familiar with that concept, what a space elevator is.
Yeah, so that's a weird one, man.
Yeah.
That space elevator idea.
And it works really well in a much lower gravity, much less dense atmospheric environment. Okay. So I have one on Titan in my novel. And so that's what I reached out to the Science and Technology Entertainment Exchange about was and they will connect you with actual scientists that are actual experts in that field and tell you, oh, you can't go from this planet to that planet at that sort of speed, or everybody would be jello or what, they will look at your actual math or your actual science and help you make it real, help you ground it in at least our 2021 understanding of science.
One more question from Rodrigo, real quick. How enthusiastic are you about Villeneuve's Dune and Asimov's Foundation coming soon on Apple?
Super geeked.
I am too, man. I didn't know Foundation was coming out, but
yeah,
the new Dune.
My brother told me that a few weeks ago, but I didn't know that either.
About the new Dune.
Yeah, Foundation's great. Anybody who's read classic science fiction, sometimes classic sci-fi doesn't hold up as well because science has advanced so much in our lifetimes, even, Andrew. So sometimes things like that. But those more space opera ones like that definitely hold up. Dune, for me, I tell people this all the time. I say, before there was Star Wars, and I'm as big a Star Wars geek as you can get, before there was Star Wars, Frank Herbert wrote those novels. And he actually died before he finished the series, and his son ended up finishing it years later. But that is an epic fantasy novel series taking place in space. You know, it really has all the hallmarks of epic fantasy. It has magical creatures with magical abilities and bending of time, and all. It's got a lone hero with a. They have a feudal system with the families and the government between the two. I mean, it really is an epic fantasy series set in a sci-fi environment. And it's one of my favorites of all time. It's as good a writing as anyone has ever done in that category. I can't wait. Every adaptation, even the ones I think the Sci-Fi Channel did some like kind of adaptations of doing. I watched them.
It was like a limited series. They
Yeah,
did a part
right.
one and part two. Yeah, they were great. I thought they were really good.
Yeah, they got mediocre reviews. Not bad, just mediocre. I loved it. I can watch that stuff all the time. Yeah. And Asimov, that would be amazing.
Real quick, I just want to say hi to Scott. Thanks for being here, man. We're going to ask that question of Chris later on when we start talking about UFOs. We're definitely going to get to that.
I do have an answer for that, though, Scott.
And so one more question on science fiction, because Rodrigo's doing science fiction. He's doing a sci-fi novel. So why did flying saucers disappear from sci-fi? I miss it. Saucers.
So science fiction, we had a sci-fi author, Douglas Richards. He's a really, am I getting the name right? Pretty well established New York Times bestseller. Do a guest post at the Debrief, and it said, "How soon?" Is the title of his piece was "How Science is Ruining Science Fiction."
Oh.
I think we're in an interesting place with UFOs. I think we're in a place where it's less outlandish. Let me put it that way, right? Like the idea of science fiction, if anything, my observation of 2020, 2021 science fiction is we're moving in a very supernatural direction. We're moving in a Stranger Things kind of, supernatural meets sci-fi sort of direction.
Yeah.
And I think that's because creative people are looking for that edge. Just putting somebody out in space on a ship with, it's like, we've been doing that in fiction for 100 years. Let's push these boundaries. So I think that's why we're seeing a lot more of a supernatural tinge. As far as flying saucers themselves in fiction, yeah, you're right. That is a good question. I don't know. A little bit, we had like the Operation Blue Book series.
Yeah.
Did they have any saucers? I guess it's not really sci-fi.
No, it was sci-fi. I mean, it was based on real events, but it was really
fictionalized account.
They took a lot of liberties with the reality of it. I think what he's talking about is like, any new modern day stories. That's kind of a retelling of a previous type of story, and then a lot of the stories like.
I think you're about to is the answer. I think.
Oh, that would be cool.
It's not unusual. Like think when you and I grew up, Andrew. Right? Think of the end of the Vietnam War, and then in 1975, more or less, the last troops pulling out. And then think of the movies and TV shows from 1975 to 1985 or so, all the way up to what's the one with Charlie Sheen, Oliver Stone, Platoon, right?
Yeah,
so
Platoon,
if you're starting with Apocalypse Now, shot in 79, and you're going, there was this wave of stuff off of this enormous thing that happened, this enormous war. I think these last 4 years, starting with the New York Times article in December 2017 and taking us to now 3.5 years, almost 4 years, I think this is going to spur a lot of that. I think we're about to see that. And if that's the renaissance he's talking about, I think we are going to see that.
Yeah, that's a great answer. So let's move into talking about UFOs now, because that was the next on my list. But you have been interested in UFOs, from what I understand, since you were little. Is that?
I always tell people, I wrote a 4-part blog. It's actually still up on Plain Fiction, I think, last summer. Just kind of given, it's like 8,000 words, so you got to really want to read it. But there is a lot of comedy in there. I link to a lot of fun stuff. And but I just tried to give my own personal, this is what I always tell people. There are guys that I work with, like Tim McMillan and Micah Hanks and MJ Benias, that are much more connected on this issue than I am, and they talk to people, and sometimes I get to be in those conversations and learn neat things that might turn into a story or whatnot. But the value I try and bring to this conversation is I saw an episode of the TV show In Search Of in 1977. And at that point in time, UFOs had been more or less dead for 8 years since the Condon Report and the end of Blue Book. And they really didn't even show up in fiction much anymore. And that was this like real presentation. You know, it was, I think a year later, Jesse Marcel came on an episode of In Search Of in 78, and I think he was on again in 80, but it might have been some of the same interview. Don't quote me on all of that. But it triggered with me right away. It made sense right away. And I went, man, this is something I'm definitely curious about. So the observation I have is two. One, we've seen a lot of ups and downs since then. I mean, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s. We've got over 4 decades that I've been following this story. And I can tell you that in some ways we've been here, done that, and a lot of this. But I tell people all the time, we're in a whole new era now. We're in a whole new era. The Tic Tac incident in and of itself is something that in the 80s, I don't know what the world would have even been able to do with that conversation. I mean, really, people talk about it, but it was such a... what do you make of that, right? Like, I think even Mick West got stumped. Somebody asked him on a podcast, like, is there anything that you feel is unexplained? He says, I really don't know what to make of that. Mm-hmm. Because I think with the Tic Tac incident, with the Nimitz incident, your options are to call these military pilots liars and say this just didn't happen, or to say this did happen. And if it did happen, man, there aren't a lot of great explanations for it.
Or you could ignore it, which is what a lot of people are doing.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, but I do think that's why it's changed things. And I think that's why I was probably really encouraged when the UAPTF report came out, that although they didn't get into specific incidents, they said covering from 2004 to current, giving the impression that, you know, that incident probably lit the fuse inside the military to go, all right, something's going on.
So going back to when you first watched the In Search Of episode, did you believe it? Did you believe that we were being visited by UFOs? And
so, you know, keep in mind, Andrew, I was 8. Okay. But yeah, it made it. I would say I would believed it as a kid. I would say, keep in mind, here's the most frustrating thing, and you can attest this. Think of no internet, right?
Yeah.
So you see something like that on TV. You turn to your parents and go, "Oh my God, are there aliens?" And they go into your room, and that's the end of the discussion, right?
Yeah.
And there's no you couldn't. So that next decade or so of curiosity, up until I became an adult, was trying to convince my mom to take me to the bookstore because it was the only other place you could get UFO information. And that UFO, I always tell people, those UFO books were in a section at most bookstores called occult. So you go to a section of the bookstore that literally has like Satanism and all this stuff, and mixed in there would be the UFO books. And I had a very Catholic mother, and she was not.
I think Scott can relate to you. His story is very similar.
Yeah, right. In Search Of is the godfather to everything you see now. Ancient Aliens, all of these UFO shows. Go back, just go to IMDb and just read the episode descriptions. And read, I mean, they don't call it remote viewing, but they did episodes on astral projection.
Yeah.
You name a contemporary mystery that we're looking into scientifically. They did an episode on it. They were doing Ancient Aliens. They were doing, Eric Von Daniken and that sort of stuff back then. So yeah, that was a groundbreaking show. I wish you could stream them.
So I guess check your Twitter feed because Jack sent you a couple of questions over there.
Okay. You're going to make Grandpa look up his Twitter?
While you're looking that up,
I'm looking up my Twitter.
While you're looking that up, Jack also asks, who do you follow in the UFO world, or where do you get your UFO info? And I think you've already answered that, though, from the debrief.
Yeah, I mean, I happen to work at a really neat job. So I don't... Yeah, you know what, Jack? I'm not seeing the question here. If it is here, I'm in the middle. You may not know this, Jack. I'm in the middle of doing a show with Andrew. So yeah,
we'll get to those questions.
Andrew. Yeah, I have a message from Andrew. It says you're doing horribly. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I will deny that right now.
Question up for me. I'll be happy to answer it. So
let's see. So,
but yeah,
I think what he was talking about.
I dig around the internet. I look for information. I follow people on Twitter. There are people that do real digging. You know, what's the FOIA guy? Is that Greenwald?
Yeah, John Greenwald.
You know, there are guys like that. Tim McMillan, who I work with. Yeah. There are people like that, like digging, like on the phone, like in people's offices, like looking for that information. So those are the people I follow. I find a few people really entertaining. I like Ryan over at Post Disclosure, so I will listen to him just because I like that positive energy. But
he's an entertaining person. Yeah, I don't agree 100% with everything he says, but yeah.
Yeah, I follow Danny Silva. I think Danny Silva's really smart. That guy just likes to dig, and I got a special place in my heart for people that'll write 10,000 words on something. So
copy that, man. Sorry about that, Jack. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. He says, I didn't mean now. I asked an off-topic question earlier, and he'll send you a message on Twitter. My bad. Sorry, man. Jack. That was my bad. Sorry.
Yes. And I love your work at Hunt for Red October, Jack. You were great.
But yeah, man, awesome stuff. Jack Ryan. That's how we know the CIA is watching.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was one of the warnings I got from the debrief crew. Is like, you know, if you're going to report on this sort of stuff, but be prepared for the possibility that FBI types and whatever might be listening in. And I said, they're welcome to listen. Just me, my wife, and the cat here. Not much going on. So.
Same here, man. If they're listening to me, they probably don't have a lot going on.
That's a poor use of budget. I hate to tell you guys, if you're looking to allocate funds.
Now, no, here's a question that they might want to know. What's the latest buzz in the UFO world? So I don't keep up on everything that's going on in the UFO world because it's so busy, and I'm paying attention to remote viewing is one of the things that I'm really interested in.
Cold War. And I'm happy to talk about any non-UFO topic, Andrew, but I'll tell you, here's where I think we're at an interesting point. And I talked about this a little on Mike Mataluni's show on the Singularity Lab. An information bubble has been created. And by that, what I mean is we've had enough Harry Reids, Lou Elizondos, Chris Mellons, and now members of Congress come out and more or less say there's much longer video, there's much more detailed video, there's a lot of photos, there's classified sensor data, signal intel data that we may never get exactly into. But the bottom line is we know there's just a lot better pictures and a lot better video. And now that we know that's there, it's just not something that can stay locked away forever anymore. You know, so there was a long period of time, and I guess we're still there now, do we have a crash ship from Roswell? Do we have alien bodies? And those questions can go either way. This doesn't seem like it can go either way. It seems like this information's there. Even Bill Nelson, the new head of NASA, more or less said, like, he saw a long presentation when he was in the Senate Intelligence Committee, and he said, personally, I don't think it's us. I don't think it's humans.
That's the head of NASA, the current head of NASA?
That's the head of NASA. I wrote about that. You can go Google the debrief.org. Put in NASA and UFOs, and I wrote 2 different stories about it. One
I missed
June
those.
And one maybe a week ago.
Yeah.
But he has said that he's going to put the scientific minds at NASA on this task. So I think we're in a new spot. You know, the military says they're looking at it. We know they got a bunch of cool tapes and photos, and they're going to bring scientists from NASA in to look at it. And
so
how that's going to manifest, that'll be my job to try and find out, as well as other reporters. So cool. I will try and find out for you how are the scientists at NASA getting all the data? Is it spread out amongst a group? Is everybody looking at it? Is one guy looking at it, one woman looking at it? You know, how is that being done? Are the mechanics I'm going to try and get into here? But I can tell you that, you know, I think that's where we're at now. I think we've kind of got 2 distinct mainstream situations. The DoD and their increased efforts after that report. I think NASA and their increased efforts. And then I think for the first time really in history, because of modern technology, we have a legitimate citizens effort going on around the world. I think people putting cameras and pointing them at the sky, people going out in their vehicles and taping stuff and all of this sort of thing. When you look at the main restriction on modern, everyday citizens looking into this in, say, the 50s or 60s, so many of those barriers are gone. We have high-tech cameras in our houses. You can go buy a night scope for what, $30 on Amazon, right? Like,
Yeah.
So, yeah, I just feel like we're at a place in time where if there really is something non-human flying around, or if there's something human flying around that we're being lied to about, because as I tell everyone when the UAPTF report came out, well, they said it's not us. So then your options are it's aliens or the government's lying, right? Like, how hard is it for the government to be lying? So
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I completely distrust. I'm just saying them saying it's not American secret project to me has very little weight on whether or not it's a secret American project, if that means anything.
Yeah.
So I think them say, oh, no, it's not. We've looked in, Chris Mellon and these guys, I've done, and we've dug, and there's just nothing that indicates it's a secret American project. I don't know that they have that access. I don't know, I'm still not sold on that.
Yeah. So the speculation and the rumor mill that's going around that I saw today a little bit on UFO Twitter, that this topic could go away if they stop talking about it. What's the likelihood of that happening? You think there's any?
I mean, hey, Andrew, it goes through ebbs and flows, my man. So I do think that I can tell you that for decades it would, from that episode in 1980, like the big Jesse Marcel episode, 78, whichever one it was, till like the X-Files. Like, it was over a decade of where, unless you wanted to like read about Whitley Strieber abductions or these sort of, like, there wasn't a lot out there, and it was just a book here, a book there. Richard Dolan said a year ago that he thought everything was going to come to a halt now that we have these new tapes out and all that. And since he said that, the UAPTF bill got voted in and the first report came out. So did we come to a screaming halt, or did a ton of stuff happen since then?
I think a ton of stuff happened. Yeah.
Yeah. And
more and more mainstream media is talking about it all the time.
To me, I just don't discount the fact that the new head at NASA said I'm putting them on the job. I know I'm harping on that one point, but
no, that's huge.
I feel like that doesn't go away, at minimum, without a good answer. At minimum, without hey, we looked at it, we put the scientists on it, and we came up with nothing. Well, then let's see the video and the pictures and everything you guys looked at to come up with nothing. Because if your answer is we looked at FLIR, gimbal, and go fast and came up with nothing, fair enough. It's what are we going to say? Those tapes can be argued all day. But if they're looking at real stuff or much more in-depth stuff, and I'm not discounting the 3 videos that are out. I'm just saying, if there's one can argue whether or not you're seeing the 5 observables in those videos. If we have the stuff the 5 observables, I think that's or a clear photo of something like the triangle photo or something like that shows no control surfaces, no clear method of propulsion, and things flying around. I think those sort of things, or transmedium coming in and out of the water. Yeah. So I think people are seeing that. I think those videos and photos exist, and I think it's a matter of time before we see them. I don't know. That's just what I think.
So back to Scott's question. Have you ever seen a UFO or had your own UFO experience?
So in 1976, when I was 7, I was with a couple other people and saw what I would describe as a triangle craft.
Well, set the.
So this is something I fought with myself about talking about for a long time, because the people that were there are not people I want to.
Well, you don't have to
talk to them about it since then, and I feel weird. I can tell you my sister was there, but she didn't see it. She was at a horseback riding lesson, and we were out in San Diego, out in the boonies. And and it was like a twilight horse riding lesson that kind of started. Sun was up, and as it was getting darker and darker, and like I said, there were some other people there, and someone I was there with, and I. Now, keep in mind, this is a year before Star Wars has come out, and although Close Encounters came out that summer, I didn't see that movie at 7 years old. So I had no, like, UFO didn't mean anything to me at that age. I had no concept or whatever. So what I saw was really high in the sky. I hate to say it because it makes my bosses crazy. It looks exactly like the triangle photo from the Debrief article in December. I mean, there's the 3 white lights at the corner, no red light in the center, no anything, but it was really high up. It was clearly defined. I would almost call it closer to gunmetal gray than black. And it was moving across the sky very quietly and just moving. Not going super fast, but was clearly not. There was no exhaust. You could just tell it wasn't an airplane. It was just these 3. And I remember the other person I was with, we kind of looked at each other and we were looking at it and we had no frame of reference. There was no UFOs in my life. So it was just, what is that flying up there? And it was clearly not an airplane. It was just clearly not. And it was this clearly, I mean, it was just perfectly defined triangle with 3 lights. That's all it was. And I will honestly say that even when I did see In Search of a year later, when I did, it really wasn't probably till many years later that I thought about that and went, that's what I saw. Like, it didn't immediately jump into my head a year later when I saw In Search of, and go, that's what I saw. I never really thought about that for a long, long time. My one other experience is a little less exciting and even more frustrating. I was driving with a buddy out to Vegas from San Diego. I was in my mid-20s. I was in the passenger seat of his car, laid back. We were both sober because we hadn't gotten to Vegas yet, right? Nobody was drinking or doing anything. So we're just cruising back, and I was kind of looking off. I guess you're going north on the 15 to Vegas. And I'm looking off to my east to the desert. And I'm just, you can see planes and things, and it's a long, long drive. And I find myself kind of watching one light. And I've taken some astronomy classes at college and stuff, so I'm noting the constellations around it. I'm going, yeah, that's probably Venus, because it was blue and whatever. And then just all of a sudden it goes, shoo, and zips off backwards. Now, when you're watching something with another person, something crazy happens, you turn to them and go, what the F was that? Right? Yeah. So I turn to my buddy, and as I turn to him, I can just see he's just driving.
He didn't even see it.
And I'm just like, And he goes, what? And I go, never mind.
Wow.
Could it have been some sort of like missile that was hovering, or a plane that shot a missile all of a sudden that was illuminated? I've tried to come up with more conventional explanations, but it sure just looked like a light that was hovering and then shot off at Mach 5 or something, like a crazy, way too fast shoot off that it made me kind of jump in my seat and turn to my buddy. So
that's wild.
Those are my 2 experiences. Neither one is that spectacular. I told Tim when I started working at the Debrief and I saw that triangle photo, it creeped me out. I mean, it was. I know it's the one that went on the internet is a recreation. It was like a drawing, a rendering photo, yeah. And that thing freaked me out because it's like exactly. So someday I will confirm with the other person who was there and see if they're willing to talk about it. And if they are, maybe we'll do a show together about it because there was a co-witness. It's just something I haven't addressed, but that person is still alive and someone I could still talk.
Cool. Did it have any impact on your life? Afterwards, some people. The reason I say it is some people become like that's like a central focus in their life to where they have to find answers, and they still can carry on a regular lifestyle. But
absolutely, I think. So I'm wary of people that look to UFOs to find the meaning of life, right? Like this is, I used to write UAP research for a little while for Joel over at Joel Griffin Dodd, Joel's inspiration. I don't know what he is on the internet right now, but Joel from UFO Twitter, most people know him. And I was writing for him over there, and he sees a lot of these more kind of supernatural possibilities, supernatural explanations. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not averse to discussing or being open to supernatural phenomena. I just don't connect the UFO phenomenon to it. And that could just be my age. That could just be I grew up. I always like to tell people that 24 days after I was born, my mother set me in a chair in front of the TV so I could watch Man Walk on the Moon. And she says, I know you won't remember it, but you can at least tell people you watched it, right?
Yeah.
So at age 24. So it could just, 24 days old. So it could just be the era I'm from, that to me, UFOs feel like either a secret American project, and I don't really put credence in any other country. I really do think it's either a secret American project or a non-human intelligence. And I think there's a good argument for both happening at the same time. So I don't know that it would ever be religious in that matter. But I do think, and I can tell you that the feeling after that first experience, seeing that triangle, and as I aged with that, like I said, there was a point in my teens, X-Files and those sort of things, like it was starting to become a big deal, or around that time, early 20s. It did have an impact. Like it did start to sink in that, like, I think I saw something that was either really advanced human technology that's kind of hidden from us, but it did, there was a magical feeling, I won't lie, because it was moving in a way airplanes don't move. It was flying without propulsion. It was really high up. It was a shape that I'd never seen. And yes, I think it's had some effect. I don't, I think if I saw a ghost, like, right, or if I saw my dead grandmother, like, show up, or what, like, or 10 minutes after my father died, he shows up at my bedside, or some of these things I read about, past life, things like that. Yeah, near-death experience, I think those things could really have that sort of impact. For me, the UFO was just really like, oh, what the fuck was that? And then I do think the one where I saw the light zoom, I always have that, like, I was in Nevada where they test everything. Who knows?
Yeah.
And it was just a light. So
cool.
But goddamn if it didn't go fast, Andrew.
Yeah. No, that's
blow me away to where I'm like, dude, did you? Oh, no, he didn't see that. So
there's I'm not a big time investigator, but there are cases where people see multiple, or they have multiple sightings throughout their life. It's not just one time.
Yeah.
And I think that is actually more common than is believed, where people have more than one sighting throughout their life.
I think it's like anything in life. I think there's a huge percentage of people just don't want to talk about it because there's no benefit to it. That's why I said I've even resisted. As a guy who writes at the Debrief, who writes about science, I mean, really, those two articles about NASA and UFOs are my only UFO articles because NASA is my beat, because I write about science and I cover stories at NASA. So I've always been reluctant to get into those and discuss those, not for any personal, like I said at the beginning of the show, we're all dead in 50. Like, I don't give a crap what people think. But as far as maintaining a professional reputation and writing about science and talking to astrobiologists and astronomers and people like that on the phone, I've reserved from saying, hey, I saw something.
Yeah.
So I guess there's still, even for a guy like me, I can feel a hint of that.
Do you have a favorite case, favorite UFO case?
So I think the Tic Tac is a real thing. I think I believe them. I didn't use the AI software they used on the new Discovery Channel Are People Lying show. Did you see that one where they were running Marcel? They took a bunch of these old witnesses just on Travel Channel the other night. I think it's streaming right now. But they're going through Roswell and they're taking all these old tapes of people, that witnesses, and the daughter of the sheriff or this one, and all that kind of have pieces of the story, and they're using this AI software to evaluate their voice and their faces and stuff and try and determine who was lying and who was telling the truth.
Wow, interesting. I didn't even hear about that.
Yeah, I was just watching it the other night, so I thought that was really interesting. So I think we all do that, right? Like, we all have that software in our head when you're listening to somebody.
Yeah.
Is this person lying or telling the truth? And I talked to Tim McMillan about that more than once because he was a police investigator. And so he has to do, you would have to profile people and see who's full of it. And so the one that really stands out, I would say, of the modern of the UFO cases, of our UAP cases, would be the Tic Tac. But I got to tell you, the case I find the most intriguing and the one that really is not leaving my head is the Ariel School in Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
Because when you watch those kids give that testimony to that psychiatrist back when it happened in the 90s, there's no dishonesty cues in those faces at all. I picked up nothing. And like I said, I'm not a police investigator like Tim. I'm not a profiler, but I feel like I'm pretty good read when people are full of it. And I think a lot of us feel that way. And they feel authentic. And then when you saw them as adults, a few of them recounting it and the look on their face, I don't want to get into some people's favorite cases, but like, for instance, when I would watch the guys from Rendlesham Air Force Base.
Yes.
See, I think they're all lying. That's just my opinion. Again, I'm not, at the risk of getting sued for libel. I don't have any information. I'm not saying they're lying. I'm saying my take on their body language, their facial cues, the way they tell the story, even pupil reactions, things like that you can't really control. I don't believe any of them. Mm. So, and I have the same problem with the Travis Walton case and the guys involved in that abduction. So, doesn't mean I'm right. Doesn't mean I know anything. It's just my opinion. But when I watch those kids from Ariel School as children and then again as young adults, man, whatever happened, they believe the story they're telling, and that's pretty insane.
Yeah, and it's a pretty wild story. I mean,
did you see the new Stephen Greer documentary? Everyone's
the
talking
one
about
that's on YouTube, came out on YouTube. Yeah, I saw that.
So there was a really neat moment I thought in there that was kind of lost amongst the fray of Stephen Greer and his whatever people's opinions on him. Was the one researcher she was talking, and she brought out the Native American guy who may or may not have seen a crash in 1945 or 46 out in the desert. He was in the middle of this special, and he was telling the story of being a kid and looking at the aliens and having, or what he thought were aliens, and they were more or less like his descriptions of their communication psychically, for lack of a better term, telepathically to him, was so similar to that Zimbabwe case. And the way the kids would talk about receiving, he even says, I received a bunch of images that didn't make sense to me at that age, but I also could feel their pain and I could feel their fear and that they were far from home. And, again, who knows who's telling what. The guy really came off authentic, and his story really rang similar to that. So, yeah, that phenomenon, I mean, hey, when people take DMT, they experience aliens and think they see alien visitors, and our brain makes its own DMT. So is it possible there are situations where people are just straight up hallucinating stuff and they really do believe they interacted with it? Yeah, I guess it's possible. Sure. Is it possible a whole group of kids did it all at the same time? Unless somebody spiked them all with the drink and they all have the exact same DMT experience. So,
seems unlikely.
Not to me, not scientifically. It seems very unlikely.
So let's switch gears a little bit, get kind of off the UFO topic for a little bit and talk about your work at the Debrief.
Yeah.
So your favorite assignment so far. Now, do you get to pick the assignments or do you have them given to you?
So when I first started there, our editor-in-chief, MJ Benice, was assigning me assignments, and he would have me pitch. And so I would pitch ideas. He would sign me ideas. I would say a couple of months ago, they promoted me to head science writer is my title over there now. And I am pretty much pecking my own assignments at this point. I still pitch things for bigger features. I can tell you, my favorite one so far, I've been writing there for 7 months. And my favorite one so far, it's not even close. It came out early last week. It was about Mark Sokol, the guy that Mike
the Warp Drive guy
interviewed on Thursday.
Did they interview that guy?
Yeah, so he was canceled. He even sent me, I had it, I should have sent it to you. I text Mark, I said, are you really not going on Mike's thing? And he sent me a picture from outside of his lab, and you could see the Falcon Space sign up on the lab, and the water was up like above the doorway.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, they really had a flood. So later that night, I'm texting with MJ over at the Debrief, and he says, hey, we should have this guy do a podcast with us, this Mark. And I said, yeah, I guess he had to pull out a Mike show tonight. And he says, oh, no, he was on. I go, what? So I went back to the tape because it was already streamed at that point. And yeah, he did end up coming on.
Oh, that's cool. I'm going to have to check that out.
He's as fun interview as I've had here. We had multiple phone conversations. I think I had a 2-hour interview and then a 1-hour interview. I recorded multiple conversations with him. And he was just the most fun because a real guy doing real stuff. I talked to a lot of theoretical, the person I compare him the most to, I spoke with a guy named Jacko Karras. And Jacko built the Ingenuity helicopter.
Oh, nice.
That is on the Mars rover.
Cool.
And he's a hands-on roboticist. He's not a physicist. He doesn't have 10 years of degrees and PhDs left and right. He's a guy who builds stuff. And that's what he does. And they went to him and said, build us this helicopter. And that's his expertise. He's hands-on. He's a practical guy. Now, it doesn't mean he's not highly educated. But Mark, when I met him, who has Falcon Space, and the guy who I wrote this feature on, he is that hands-on. We're going to try it in the lab. We're going to buy this $60,000 piece of equipment. We're going to buy this, state-of-the-art 3D printer so we can print samples at every site. And they run experiments on anti-gravity, on warp detection, on all kinds of neat stuff. That's cool. That article took me 3 months. I interviewed that guy at the beginning of April. It took me April, May, and June, and that story didn't go up till the end of June. So that was a 3-month arc. Almost half the time I've been there, I worked on that story.
So how do you get once you decide on a topic, or you come up with the idea for an article, how do you then suss out leads to get the information for?
So there's a number of steps. I'll try and make it as simple and not too boring. But basically, if it's a breaking news, right? Say it's an announcement that scientists have learned. I just turned in the story the other day that scientists have figured out that babies up until they're 7 months old can see things that adults cannot. Or even people 7 months, 8 months, younger children. But babies have this visual perception where they can elude this thing called visual backward masking. And without getting into all the details, they can see things we can't. Wow. That was the bottom line of the story. So I saw that in a news announcement, and people that write science or anything for a living, you're signed up to these services that give you breaking announcements from universities or NASA or Johns Hopkins or these places that are doing science. And now if I get announcements from General Electric or whatever. So I'll get a press release on something. Oftentimes we'll get press releases on things that are embargoed, which means the story can't even be printed for a week. So, or whatever the release date is. So you can start researching and put some legwork in on a shorter story before it comes out. And so that is what you would think. You go to the research, you got to read the research, you got to understand it. I always tell the hardest part of my job is I'm taking very complex research and reading it. I'm taking very complex conversations with scientists, and then I'm trying to turn that into something that just an everyday person could read and get.
And it's entertaining enough to keep their attention, right?
And that, yeah, and also, Andrew, that's because I'm an everyday person. Yeah. I don't have a PhD in sciences. My education is political science at UCLA, and that's not really political science is not science. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah,
So having
being a stand-up comedian, but it wasn't great training for writing about science. But science is always something I followed, always something I've read about, always something I've been interested in. And that's my job there. So yeah, taking a story, reading an entire research paper that someone has published, reading other interviews they've done, there's a lot of steps depending on how in depth you want to go with something. And then at the Debrief, we're a news site. So a big part of what we do is reaching out to these people and having them comment or explain, or more often give us one step more than what I read in your press release. I get the general here, but take me into the nitty gritty. Take me into the what you guys found that you didn't expect to find, or something you were hoping to find that you didn't. Any of those things. So working with researchers, that's my favorite part of the job. Reading and writing are work, but getting on the phone and talking to somebody at the University of Purdue who's working on a new metamaterial that will protect soldiers from electromagnetic weapons, I go, man, I could talk to that guy all day. So that's my favorite part of the job, no doubt about it. So that's how I develop those stories.
You literally talk to people that are on the cutting edge of science, technology, medicine. I've read some of your articles, and there's some of my favorite articles from the Debrief.
Yeah, you've told me that online. I think you and I got to know each other a little before that, because I think we were in the same group over there with Mataluni and all those guys. But yeah, once you started reading my stuff, I did know, and I told everyone, I said, I'm going on Andrew's show. I told everyone at the Debrief, sooner or later, when we're cleared for me to do this sort of stuff, I'm going on Andrew's show, because that's my guy. But, Andrew, that's what we try and do with the Debrief, and that's what I find fun there. When I started working, my wife goes, this is perfect for you, because this is what I read anyways. I go to Archive. I go to phys.org. I go to these sites that really scientists go to and researchers go to and share the latest on what they're researching. And I dig through there and I go, here's a bunch of articles on viruses. Here's articles on COVID here. And then right in the middle, I'll find an article that says, like, scientists have found that corals talk to each other. And I go, bam, that's my story, right? That's what I'm looking at. It's like babies see things that adults don't. Bam. That's what I'm looking for. So it's so off the cuff type of stuff. Like, you don't hear about it talked about often. One of the things that I found super interesting, and it's still going on, is the Cuban syndrome, Havana syndrome. Yeah, that's one thing that I can't find enough information about that story. So my very first story, when I started at the Debrief on December 8th, MJ threw me that assignment. It was the one I actually mentioned about the University of Purdue. And he said, here's a researcher. He's working on this 2D fabric called MXene. It's like graphene, as a two-dimensional metamaterial that they're developing that will help protect from various things. Like, we didn't have any idea what I was really getting into. So I get on with the guy. I start researching, and I talking to the researcher. And within there, he says, this will block these electromagnetic waves. It'll block these microwaves that we believe countries are using as a weapon against ambassadors and people's, at the what's the term I'm thinking of? But our
intelligence officers too.
Yeah, intelligence officers too. Yeah, but our diplomatic corps was the term I was looking for. And I think it was called Havana syndrome because it happened first in Cuba, right?
That's the place it was, noticed.
Yeah, so I start talking to this researcher, and he says, oh, yeah, this material I'm building, you could weave it right into the clothes and the hats and the helmet, and it would just block all that. It would be like walking around in a Faraday cage, and it would just block that. So, yeah, that's a real thing. That's something that's, you pointed out on stuff that seems to be really intense that maybe isn't covered as much as it should be.
Yeah.
That's one that we cover a lot that I don't see covered as much everywhere, although maybe like Fox News or something will cover it from time to time. But you don't really see it covered that often. But yeah, this is a real scenario, and it's a real way they're attacking our diplomats and our intelligence agents. Yeah. There's no doubt about it.
There's so many reasons we could get into why it's not covered as often. But it just I think we could leave it at what you said, because it does need more coverage because people are being affected negatively. But
Americans are under attack in other countries.
Exactly.
It's definitely news.
So what is your dream assignment? What's the one assignment that you've been just...
I'm working on it.
You work... you can't tell me, right?
So I have a couple of primary beats over at the Debrief. Like I said, I have kind of a NASA science beat. Sorry, there's a fruit fly flying around in here, okay. Making me crazy. So I do a lot of NASA, a lot of space science, but I also do our exotic or advanced propulsion. So I've written stories, about 4 different stories on different warp drive concepts. One that a guy has patented or is trying to patent. Another by a group of physicists in Sweden who have developed one. I'm sorry, Switzerland who have developed one. I cover a lot of these. I covered the M drive. Do you know what the M drive is, Andrew?
No.
So I won't get too deep into the woods on that one, but it's a controversial project that NASA and some other people have put a lot of money into, and it seems to violate Newton's laws of motion and conservation of momentum. So that's the type of stuff I cover, is these advanced propulsions. So I'm in the middle of a series right now of about 6 stories. I think the first one I'm hoping comes right at the end of this coming week. And that'll be like a pilot piece. And then I will follow with about 5 super cool, cutting edge, advanced propulsion projects that are real, that are being worked on by real engineers with real funding. I will, without getting too deep into it, I'll tell you there's a connection to DARPA that involves the funding.
Wow.
But yeah, I'm right in the middle of talking to some really amazing people at big universities and again at big institutes that are working with DARPA on these different projects. And that big feature is going to be great. And then out of that feature, I had a conversation with a researcher recently about something that I'm having a hard time getting my head around what he told me was real.
Wow.
So look for that in about a month. Okay. If that turns out to be real, that's going to be the biggest story I've written at the Debrief.
Wow. I can't wait for that one now.
Yeah. You know what, Andrew? If it turns into a big nothing burger, nothing comes out of it, I'll tell you privately what came out of it.
Cool.
But it sure sounds like there's something real here. And I can't believe, every once in a while you'll be on the phone. I know Tim goes through this with the UFO stuff, that he'll be on the phone and someone will tell him something insane, but you can't really confirm it with anybody. There's no way to print it in a story. And, so when a mainstream scientist at a big place doing big research with big money tells you something insane as this guy told me the other day, and you ask him, can I write about that? He says, give me a month. Yeah, I'm not going to sleep for a month, but I have a lot of writing between to do now and then. And that big multi-part feature on the exotic propulsion is going to be amazing. I mean, the stuff these guys are working on, I don't want to give too much away, but it's incredible stuff.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing more about it. What I was going to ask you is, since you're talking to these people at DARPA, is there any possibility that we'll see some of these people coming out and talking about this stuff publicly, like on the Debrief podcast or maybe Matt Lou's podcast?
Can you mean the stuff I'm talking about, these exotic propulsions that are related?
Yeah,
we're going to see some of these people. Yeah, so it's taken us a little while to get the YouTube and the podcast and all that to where I think we're all happy with the Debrief. I think we've had a few false starts. We've tried a couple of different people. I think with Christina Gomez and Christy Newton, we've really settled into a couple of amazing presenters that are doing great jobs. And so they're both starting to get piled up with stuff. So I think you're going to start seeing a lot more feature videos out of them, a lot more interviews. I know Christina, I'm covering a couple of science fiction authors that are doing a big NFT auction, and she's doing a video for me on them. She's helping with some of these advanced propulsion ones I talked about. I know she told me that MJ gave her some assignments recently, but she wouldn't tell me what they were. So I think there's some pretty cool stuff. So, right. Yeah, I think we're about to see a lot of that. And, yeah, anytime, if I report on something that I feel is incredible, but I have a real scientist talking about it, yeah, I'll find a way to get him to talk about it on camera if it's at all possible.
Definitely. Scott Brown says, and I think I know why he's asking this question. Are you a Philip K. Dick fan?
Sure. Yep.
You look like him, man. I just realized that when he asked that question, you look a lot like Philip K. Dick.
I do have a little Philip K. Dick. Huh?
Yeah.
So here's what everyone then just take my picture, and when somebody asks you to text them a dick pic,
right.
There's
the Philip K. Dick. I was over at the Debrief doing my due diligence before this episode, and I saw R.S. Penney had written an article for you guys. How did you head that guy?
Yeah, so Rich is a science fiction author that you had on your show, and as I said, we've done about 8 of these since March, where we will reach out to someone in the science fiction community who has published works. They pretty much all mostly been bestsellers. We had Eliza Green on there. G.S. Jensen wrote a great piece about faster than light travel. And yeah, so I saw Rich on your show, and I saw he was booked on your show, and he was someone I had already read his first novel. Now, don't ask me to tell you, I read so many, but all that stuff goes in now. But I knew who he was. I was all excited to see him on your show. And so I just sent him a note. I said, hey, Rich, I see you're going to be on Dead Hand, and Andrew and I are buddies, and we have this thing. And I can tell you, as a guy who sells books, when a website like the Debrief that has a nice big readership comes to you and says, do an article, we'll promote your books, and you don't have to pay us, because that's the stuff we get hit with a lot. You ask independent authors, they'll tell you. You get a lot of emails saying, hey, do a guest blog for us, but they want you to pay for it. They basically want you to buy a full-page ad. We don't do that. When we have a science fiction author that's writing an environment we find interesting, that's writing a style we find interesting, that's successful, and is interested in coming on and doing a guest piece for us, we'll promote their books for them and promote their websites and all of that. So yeah, Rich did a great job. It was stoked that you had him on, because it opened that door for me to reach out to him.
Very cool. Well, happy to be part of that.
That came straight from you, Andrew. Have no doubt. You booked that guy, and I came right into your wake like a pilot fish on the gills of a shark, and reached out and took the meat that was left over. Thank you so much.
So just a follow up on that, is the Debrief actively seeking writers for different types of projects?
So we're always looking for writers like that do what I do, people that can take assignments. We've recently added a couple. Liam and Candy and Harrison all joined within the last month or two. We have one more getting ready to join. So as far as like staff writers, if you're a young, college age or a little older writer who's looking to break in, looking to get bylines, and looking to write about science and technology, yeah, my DMs are open. Reach out to me. I'll put you in touch with the editor. We are picky. I'm not going to lie. The writing, I've been writing for 30 years, and they had to train me how to write in the Debrief style. So we are a little bit picky. As far as guest authors, so here's what I will tell you. We would always love a great guest author. Science fiction authors, people who write for science fiction TV shows, science fiction movies, things like that. We're lining some of those up for deeper into the summer and for the fall. So there will be more people like that. If there's somebody who does that for a living, if you write and you write in this field, shoot me a DM. If you're interested in writing a guest post, I can at least talk to you about it. I can't guarantee everyone will get in there. There's only so much room every month, and we don't want it to just be a parade of guest posts. We are a science and news website. But yes, I'm always open, and if you know sci-fi writers, we just added another one. God, I wish I could think of his name. But he's writing a whole piece about the universal translator that's used in his books. And I was like, man, that's awesome. I can't wait to read that piece. So
I do actually have a couple of writers that I'll send your way.
Send them my way, and if they're friends of yours, Andrew, I'll get them in there.
Okay, cool. Yep. So let's see this. Okay. Is it a coincidence all of this UFO stuff and recent breakthroughs. Oh, so the UFOs and the recent breakthroughs in technology, is there a correlation there? I think that's what Rodrigo's asking.
So if the UFOs, if things like, at least some, like the more physical, seemingly material objects seen in these military videos, things that are showing up on radar and sonar, things like the Tic Tac, things that seem to be physical, material objects, could that be connected to advances in human science? Sure. I've said on the record, the government coming out, the report coming out and saying, well, we're or Chris Mellon, any of these guys saying, well, it's not us. It's not a secret black project. It's not that I know more than they do. They're farther inside than I am. I just don't believe that takes that off the table, that them saying that. Mm-hmm. So these guys like Pais that have these controversial anti-gravity patents or these sort of things that are popping up, are they going hand in hand? I don't know. It's definitely doesn't seem impossible. I don't believe in a lot of coincidence. So I think when things time out a certain way, it's not impossible.
All right, so I'm gonna just start winding down a little bit. Ask you some kind of easy questions, like what's on the other side of a black hole. I promised I would ask that one on Twitter.
Hey, I thought you were going to ask about time travel, right?
Well, that's next.
All right. So what's on the other side of a black hole? So there's some new science here, actually. So before he died, Stephen Hawking won his Nobel Prize for Hawking radiation, and the idea that a black hole doesn't completely absorb everything, that there is at least some information lost, for lack of a better term, at the event horizon. Now, keep in mind, guys like you and I who grew up with like the movie The Black Hole, right, in the 70s or whatever, there was this idea that if you're flying through space and you see the black hole, there's an entrance. Mm-hmm. Now, here's the way I would like people to think of a black hole. Think of a marble out in space, and think of the black hole being the center of that marble. And then around that is the black hole's event horizon, right? That's where the effects of the black hole meet normal space around it. So that event horizon is all in every direction. So there is no going to the other side. The other side of the black hole is the same as the side you're coming in. It's normal space with the black hole. However, at the center of that is the black hole that's pulling in everything. It's this insane amount of gravitational pull that, as we know, is pulling in everything. First of all, black holes are purely theoretical. Up until recently, we just recently imaged the event horizon with telescopes. So for the first time ever, we can actually look at an image and go, there's the intersection of a black hole with real space. We sort of have a picture of the hole itself. There's something called a white hole. Have you heard of that, Andrew?
No.
So this is pretty new in astronomy. And it's, again, also theoretical. But there is this concept that at some point, a black hole becomes full. It sucks in the last bit of light, material, energy, EM radiation, everything else it can suck in around it. In a sense, becomes full, and then it becomes the exact opposite of a black hole, and it starts sending all that same material out.
That's interesting.
And it's called a white hole, and it's a pretty, I think theoretically it's been around for a while, but it's something that's being discussed seriously now, since we're at the point where we can finally image black holes.
Yeah, that's fascinating, man.
Yeah, so Google, if you, make sure you put the word astronomy in front if you Google white hole. But yes, there's a lot of interesting data on it. It's a pretty cutting edge concept, and there's a good possibility that. And as far as going through a black hole, actually, this will get into the time travel question. So I'll answer the time travel question that I'll come back to. So, is time travel possible?
It is time travel possible. Okay. That is the question.
So there are two answers. Time travel to the future is not only possible, it's proven.
Wow.
So in Einsteinian relativity, if you go really fast, time for you passes much
Oh,
slower.
yeah.
So
Okay, right.
everybody's heard this, right?
Yeah.
So say, for instance, you had a ship that could go 95% of the speed of light. You could jump out in space, you zip up to that speed, take you about a year at 1G, right, to get up to that speed. And say you went that speed for a few years, flip the U-turn. How you would do that, I don't know. Come back home, spend that last year decelerating at 1G, and after 5 years, maybe 150 years have passed on Earth. You have effectively traveled into the future.
Okay.
And that is, in the 80s, they took a couple of really highly sensitive atomic clocks, and they synchronized them perfectly, put one in a truck and one in a commercial jet, and flew them across from New York to LA, I believe. It was coast to coast. And when they got to the other side, they checked the two clocks, and the one on the airplane was a little bit behind because it had gone faster. And just that simple difference in speed, 550 miles an hour versus 60, 70 miles an hour, was measurable. For lack of a better explanation, the airplane, it was slightly behind in time from the car in the real world, like it had traveled into the future. Does that make sense?
Yes, 100%.
As far as traveling into the past, I'm going to lean with T'Pol and the Science Directorate from the Enterprise TV series of the Vulcan Science Directorate, and say that I do not believe in travel into the past.
Okay.
Now, again, that answer to that question is what I believe. So when I read about, even the most extreme exotic warp drive that takes Jupiter-sized amounts of energy to fuel still exist in reality somewhere that you could tap into that amount of energy. The amount of energy I've read about that people talk about when trying to go into the past seems so extreme. And at least for now in my life, I have a little more materialist explanation. So I kind of feel like time is the fourth dimension. We're moving along that dimension. And when something's happened, it's happened. There ain't no going back to it. So that's my belief. I know some people lean towards time travelers from the future, and keeping in mind that I know nothing. It's not consistent with the science the way I understand.
So, hypothetical question, and this will be the last interview question, then I'll give you a chance to talk about some other stuff.
Cool.
But if you could go back in time, if it was possible to go back in time, which time period would you want to go to?
That's a good question. I know it's something a lot of people, it's something we've all kind of philosophized around the campfire or whatever. So the sad truth is, how long do I got to stay? Because, like the vast majority of history, they don't even have indoor plumbing, right? Like, so most of history is really gross. So like how long I have to stay there is part of the question. As far as intellectual curiosity, I think there's two megalith periods that I find very interesting. So the time that the pyramids were built, because that is still a mystery, I would love to just see how the humans, that I do think it was built by humans, I would love to see how they went about that. And then there's a site in Turkey called Göbekli Tepe.
Right.
That's from basically about 10,000 BC. And the reason that's significant is, we were hunter-gatherers up until maybe 5,000, 6,000 BC. I mean, maybe the Jomon people in Japan, 7,000 BC. But literally, the length of time between Christ and now, the last 2,000 years, you go twice that far back from like the first farmers and the first society to this temple with these perfectly carved animals and perfectly carved representations of things. So who was there doing that in 10,000 BC and what they were doing and what sort of rituals they were having there? Yeah, those are the two times that I think it would be really neat.
That's a great answer. So with that, we'll go ahead and close it out. But do you have any final thoughts for what we talked about tonight? We talked about
I would, I just one more thought since we were on. I wouldn't mind going back to July of '47 and parking my vehicle out in the middle of Max Brazel's ranch, and bringing my, video camera with me and seeing what I could come up with.
Agreed.
Here's what I'd like to tell you, Andrew. First of all, I'm a fan. I just like your show. I tell people about your show all the time. I share it on Twitter. I'm just a fan. I just think I don't know if people know what real Dead Hand Radio was or the history of Dead Hand Radio. Maybe someday you should do a story about the history of the original Dead Hand Radio, and I would watch that. But
so time out. Is there such thing as Dead Hand Radio before this one?
Well, so there was this idea. There was a concept, and there's this place. Man, I would have to do a little more research. I thought you knew about it, so I wouldn't have to pretend like I knew something here.
Go ahead.
There's a Cold War era station.
Right. I do know what you're talking about.
Former Soviet Union. Okay, yeah. So that's the Dead Hand Radio thing. When I saw the name of your show, that was the first thing that came to mind months ago when I first came across.
That's what it was named after. It was named after the Dead Hand.
That's what I figured. So, my feeling is this, and I share people with this all the time. I grew up as a kid who found science fascinating because science is an opportunity for regular, everyday people to figure stuff out that seems hard to figure out. And science has a compound knowledge that builds on generation after generation. So people that are doing genetic research today are using things that were learned in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. So much like in my fantasy novels where the magic is imbued into the heirloom ores and passed on to generation after generation, knowledge and understanding is what we can pass on. Because there's old, everyone references it, but about history repeating itself, and it's a true adage. If we're not informed, we're going to make the same mistakes over and over again, and that's what I find so exciting about science. I can tell you, I worked with a lot of comedians who were in the joy business, and they were very unhappy people, the majority. And we can talk about that another show. When I talk to scientists, they're very happy. And I note the difference. People whose job is to make people happy and laugh and have fun, are they themselves maybe not always the happiest people, but these people that are on the cutting edge, that are finding that really are like guys like you and me can sit on a show and talk about these mysteries. These people are in a lab and they're looking for it. Like I'm just writing about it, right? My job is to find out these amazing things they're doing and write about them. These people, scientists that are on the cutting edge. I mean, I talked about the corals story and the corals talking to each other.
Yeah.
That's a true story. That was written by a researcher. She's 18 years old. She graduated high school and college at the same time, and she was doing professional level research on the genetics of corals in college as a high school student and got a published research paper about it. That's somebody I want to talk to. That's somebody who's on the cutting edge looking at the most amazing stuff. So yeah, if I talk to a warp engineer or the person I mentioned earlier that a month from now I got hopefully something insane coming out, like when I talk to these people, they can't believe what they get to wake up and do for a living every day. There are people that sleep in their offices. When you hear people in science are the most passionate people I've met. And that inspires me to write about it. When I get on the phone with them, I can't tell you how many 30-minute interviews turn into an hour because they are having fun talking about what they're doing, not because I have more questions.
Well, that is awesome.
Here, Andrew, I don't want to let you go. I'm having too much fun. Right?
No, hey, man. I do want to give you a chance to tell people how they can get in touch with you. We already dropped your website address out there, and you mentioned your Twitter.
Flamefiction.com. Is where you can look at my books. You learn about upcoming books, some of my old UAP blogs. I say old. I never wrote a word about UFOs or UAPs until last summer, and we were in the pandemic, and I was not running. I own a materials handling charity business that I run during the day sometimes, and I wasn't doing any business. I was just writing for a living, and so that stuff is up there. And then obviously go to the Debrief. It's been over a week since I've published anything there because I've been working on these longer features. So I do have a pile of stuff coming. You are about to get a wave of Chris Plain stories,
Very
and
cool.
each one of
Can't
them is
wait.
crazier than the next, my man. Like some of the stuff that we get over there, MJ will send me an email and he'll say, "Hey, Chris, you want to cover this?" And I go, "You got to be kidding me!" So yeah, it's a fun place to write.
It is a very talented stable of writers over there. I agree.
Oh man!
Though
Mike
you are my
McHanks,
favorite, man.
Tim McMillan, and MJ Benice. Those three guys that founded that place are three of the top writers in this field, and those guys put out these full-length features. I've just grown up to that. You know, I write full-length in my life with books and movies and stuff, but writing full-length news features was new for me. So coming in there, even though I'm a lot older than those three guys, this was all new for me, and I'm so impressed at the quality material they put out. Those three guys are just excellent writers. I'm just so impressed.
Let me drop your Twitter handle up here.
I'm at plain_fiction. You know, it's real funny, Andrew. We overlap with some conspiracy types on UFO Twitter.
Yeah.
And when I was first on, I was using that as my handle. So you actually see Christopher Plain as my name and then at plain_fiction. I used to just be Plain Fiction because my last name is Plain, and I write fiction, right? But what I really found is a bunch of people who were like conspiracy types were like, yeah, this guy's giving the truth. It's all plain fiction, man.
Wow.
So I like when I first jumped on Twitter, I was definitely getting a wave of, yeah, man, stick it to the man and tell the truth. And I'm like, no, I'm on the phone with people at NASA. They work for the government.
That's interesting too, though.
Any man.
That's interesting too. Well, Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you, and I appreciate you coming on. I would love to have you back on again, especially after that.
Why don't we plan on it, Andrew? When that big feature, you know, I have this series I mentioned, so those will be running over the next few weeks. And when this other big mystery story I'm working on, I'll keep you abreast of it privately. I will send you messages privately to let you know how that's coming along. And then, yeah, when I'm ready to come out and talk about it, I tell people all the time, I go, I get offered to do this stuff. The guys at the Debrief know it. I get offered to do these types of YouTube and these sort of interviews. And I mostly say no because I'm writing about science, and most of these places are covering the very fringe. But I just like your show, and you cover science more than any of these guys. You know, even remote viewing is being looked at scientifically, things like that. So, yeah, I'll definitely come on here when I have more to talk about.
Much appreciated.
If that story turns out to be what I think it is, man, woo! You and I are going to have fun talking about it.
I can't wait, man. So, good deal. All right. Well, everybody in the chat room, thank you guys for being here. We didn't have a bunch of people here because there's so much going on, you know, in the YouTube world, in the fighting world, but hopefully.
Yeah, I saw a lot of people texting. I was getting those messages today. Like, you sure you want to do an interview today? I go, I get to talk to Andrew for 2 hours. I'm not sure if anyone else listens, so I'm good.
Yeah, that's how I feel too, man. It's, you know, if it was just you and I still would have had a good time.
Well, I'm still shocked you and I are of an age, my man. Totally blew me away. I told everyone, I go, yeah, there's this guy, Andrew. He's like 28. He invited me on his show. He's a kid. He's got a hipster beard. He's got his UFO show. I'm going to go do a show. Turns out, no, you're an old fucker like me.
Yeah. Yeah, don't tell anybody, though. Just
right, dude? You are so undercover. If I were you, I'd be like, yeah, I'm 28, man. I'd write that all day.
No, everybody knows how old I am, man. Because I talk about my grandson all the time. I got a 4-year-old grandson.
Oh, do you? Okay.
Yeah.
And I have any children, thank goodness, but I do have a couple of nieces who are amazing. They're adults.
And pets? Do you have any pets?
Yeah, the wife and I have the way I tell people is my wife has 2 husbands, one who she loves and then me. And the other one is a cat. So, yes, we do have a cat that's been here for 13 years. He's my best buddy. I'm a rescuer. If she would let me, we'd have 10 rescue animals here. My wife's a serial pet monogamist. So when she has a pet, that's the only pet. All the attention goes to it. So that's her little man, Felix the cat. He is the inspiration for a character called Farron, who is a magical character in my novels.
Right on. Cool. All right. Well, with that, guys, we'll call it a night, and everybody have a great evening. And I'll see you. For anybody who wants to come by tomorrow, I'll be back on at 11 a.m. and talking remote viewing. Daz Smith from the UK, remote viewing.
What are you guys going to talk about?
Probably remote viewing.
Awesome.
We're going to talk about Roswell, man.
I'll put you guys on in the background, and I'll be writing. I got
awesome.
To do tomorrow.
Very cool. All right, guys. Have a good night. See you next time.
Thanks, Andrew.